Part 1. The Dawn of Rome. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back through the mists of time, back to a world of 7 hills rising above the banks of a winding river in central Italy. This is where our story begins, in a place that would one day command the known world. According to ancient tradition, Rome was founded on April 21st, in the year 753 BCE. The Romans themselves believe their city was born from legend, from the tale of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, abandoned as infants and nursed by a she-wolf in a cave at the foot of Palatine Hill. When the brothers grew to manhood and decided to establish a city, a quarrel arose over where to build it. In a moment of rage, Romulus killed his brother and became the sole founder, giving his name to the eternal city, Roma. But long before Rome would become an empire, it existed as something far more modest. For nearly 2.5 centuries, Rome was a kingdom ruled by 7 kings in succession. These were the years when the city was still finding its identity, still establishing the customs and institutions that would echo through the ages. The last of these kings, Tarquin the Proud, ruled with such tyranny that in 509 BCE, the Roman people rose up and expelled him, vowing never again to bow to a monarch. In that revolutionary moment, the Roman Republic was born. The Republic, let that word settle in your mind like dust after a storm. For nearly 5 centuries, Rome would govern itself not through the whim of kings, but through a complex system of elected magistrates, a senate of elder statesmen, and assemblies of citizens. 2 consuls shared executive power, each able to veto the other, ensuring that no single man could dominate. This balance of power, this checks and balances system, would influence governments for thousands of years to come. In these early centuries, Rome was not yet the master of the Mediterranean. It was simply one Italian city among many, struggling to survive in a world of competing peoples. The young republic fought constant wars with its neighbors, the Etruscans to the north, the Samnites in the mountains, the Greek colonies to the south. Year after year, Roman farmers would leave their plows in spring, take up their shields and spears, and march to war. When autumn came, they would return to harvest their fields, if they survived. What made Rome different from other ancient cities was not superior culture or wealth, but rather an almost stubborn resilience and an extraordinary ability to absorb those it conquered. When Rome defeated an enemy, it often granted them citizenship or made them allies rather than slaves. This genius for integration meant that Rome's army grew with each victory, fed by an ever-expanding pool of men willing to fight for the Republic. By 272 BCE, through countless battles and clever diplomacy, Rome had conquered the entire Italian peninsula, transforming from a single city into the dominant power of Italy. Yet even as Rome celebrated its mastery of Italy, a greater challenge loomed across the sea. The city of Carthage, located in North Africa and modern-day Tunisia, controlled a vast maritime empire spanning the western Mediterranean. Carthage was wealthy beyond measure, its merchants trading from one end of the sea to the other, its navy the most powerful in the world. A confrontation between these 2 great powers seemed inevitable. The clash came in 264 BCE, when Rome and Carthage went to war over the island of Sicily. This would be the first of 3 Punic Wars, conflicts that would rage on and off for more than a century and test Rome's very survival. In this first Punic War, the Romans did something extraordinary. Though they were not a seafaring people, they built an entire navy from scratch, copying the design of a captured Carthaginian ship. They added a clever innovation, a boarding bridge called the Corvus, which allowed their superior infantry to turn naval battles into land battles on wooden decks. After 23 years of grinding warfare, Rome emerged victorious, claiming Sicily as its first province beyond Italy. But peace would not last. The great Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca harbored bitter resentment for his city's defeat. He took his young son to a sacred altar and made him swear eternal hatred of Rome. That boy's name was Hannibal, and he would grow up to become Rome's most feared enemy, leading an army of men and elephants over the snow-capped Alps into Italy itself. But that tale will unfold as you drift deeper into rest, as we continue our journey through the centuries of Roman glory. For now, simply breathe in and out, and picture that small city on 7 hills, that collection of mud brick homes and temples, somehow destined to become the center of the world. Rest easy, knowing that empires are built not in moments, but across generations, stone by stone, year by year, like the gradual fading of consciousness into peaceful sleep. Part 2. Hannibal and the Test of Rome. Let your breath grow slower now, deeper, as we move forward through time to the year 218 BCE. Hannibal Barca, now a brilliant general in his own right, has kept the oath he swore as a child. He stands at the head of an army unlike any the ancient world has seen, approximately 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and most remarkably, 37 war elephants. His destination is Rome itself, but between him and his enemy lies one of nature's greatest barriers, the towering Alps. Picture, if you can, those massive gray beasts trudging through mountain passes, their breath misting in the frozen air. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps remains one of history's most audacious military achievements. For 15 days, his army climbed through treacherous paths, battling not just the cold and altitude, but hostile mountain tribes who rolled boulders down upon them. When they reached the summit, Hannibal's men gazed down upon the green plains of Italy, but the cost had been staggering. He had lost nearly half his army and most of his elephants to the brutal journey. Yet still, he descended into Italy, and Rome trembled. For the next 15 years, Hannibal would wage war on Italian soil, winning victory after victory against Roman armies. His greatest triumph came in 216 BCE at a place called Cannae. There, facing a Roman force of perhaps 80,000 men, the largest army Rome had ever assembled, Hannibal employed a tactic of devastating genius. He deliberately weakened his center, allowing the Romans to push forward, while his cavalry swept around and his veteran troops on the flanks closed in from both sides. The Romans found themselves surrounded, packed so tightly they could barely lift their swords. By day's end, somewhere between 50 and 70,000 Roman soldiers lay dead on that field, the worst single-day military disaster in Roman history. After Cannae, many believed Rome was finished. Several Italian cities defected to Hannibal's side. Yet here we see something remarkable about Roman character, something that perhaps made them different from every other ancient people. The Senate refused to negotiate. They refused to even acknowledge defeat. Instead, they changed their strategy. Rather than face Hannibal in open battle, they appointed a cautious general named Fabius Maximus, who earned the nickname the Delayer. Fabius shadowed Hannibal's army, avoiding battle, cutting off supplies, slowly bleeding the Carthaginian force through attrition. It was unglamorous, it was frustrating, but it worked. Rome's true genius, however, lay not in Italy but in a bold counterstroke. A young general named Scipio convinced the Senate to let him take the war to Africa itself, to invade Carthage's homeland. In 204 BCE, Scipio landed near Carthage, and suddenly Hannibal faced an impossible choice. He had spent 15 years in Italy, undefeated in battle, yet unable to break Rome's will. Now his own city called him home to defend it. Reluctantly, the great general sailed back to Africa, leaving Italy behind forever. The final confrontation came in 202 BCE at a place called Zama. There, on African soil, Scipio faced Hannibal in battle. The young Roman had learned from his enemy, adopting Hannibal's own tactics of mobility and maneuver. Scipio's cavalry, aided by Numidian horsemen, swept around Hannibal's flanks just as Hannibal had done to the Romans at Cannae. This time, it was the Carthaginians who found themselves surrounded. Hannibal, for the first time in his career, tasted defeat. After Zama, Carthage sued for peace, stripped of its empire, its navy, and its pride. The Second Punic War was over, and Rome had survived the greatest test it would ever face. Yet even this was not the end of the Carthaginian story. 50 years later, Rome remained haunted by the memory of Hannibal's invasion. In the Senate, an influential statesman named Cato the Elder ended every speech, regardless of topic, with the same phrase, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. His obsession became policy. In 149 BCE, Rome manufactured a pretext for war and laid siege to Carthage. The city held out for 3 years in desperate defense, but in 146 BCE, Roman soldiers finally breached the walls. What followed was systematic annihilation. The Romans killed or enslaved every inhabitant, then demolished every building. According to legend, they even sowed the fields with salt so nothing would grow there again. Though this detail may be more myth than truth, still, the message was clear. Carthage, once Rome's greatest rival, was erased from the earth. With Carthage destroyed, Rome stood unchallenged in the western Mediterranean. But the Republic's conquests were far from over. To the east, the kingdoms of the Greek world beckoned, wealthy, cultured, and increasingly unable to defend themselves. Roman armies marched into Greece, into Asia Minor, into the lands once conquered by Alexander the Great. In 146 BCE, the same year Carthage fell, Roman soldiers sacked the ancient Greek city of Corinth, sending a message to the entire Hellenic world. One by one, kingdoms that had endured for centuries became Roman provinces. Macedonia, Greece, Syria, Pergamum, all fell under Roman dominion. By 133 BCE, when the last king of Pergamum died and willed his entire kingdom to Rome in his testament, the Republic controlled virtually the entire Mediterranean coastline. But as you let these victories wash over you like gentle waves, as you feel your body growing heavier, more relaxed, consider this. Rome's very success contained the seeds of transformation. The Republic had been designed to govern a single city, not a vast empire. The simple farmer soldiers who had built Rome were being replaced by professional armies who owed loyalty to their generals rather than to the state. The wealth pouring in from conquered lands was concentrating in fewer and fewer hands. The Republic was changing, evolving, preparing for a metamorphosis that would reshape it entirely. Rest now in this moment of Roman triumph, this apex of Republican power, knowing that all things must change, just as waking must give way to sleep. Let the weight of centuries settle over you like a warm blanket, and drift toward whatever dreams await. Pot 3. The Republic's Twilight. Breathe deeply now, and let us move forward to a time of great turmoil, when the very foundations of the Republic began to crack. The year is 73 BCE, and in the gladiatorial school of Capua, south of Rome, a Thracian slave named Spartacus leads a desperate breakout. He and 78 fellow gladiators seize kitchen knives and fight their way to freedom, fleeing to the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. What begins as a simple escape transforms into something far greater, a full-scale slave rebellion. Spartacus was no ordinary slave. He had military training, possibly having served as an auxiliary in the Roman army before being enslaved. Under his leadership, the band of fugitives grows rapidly as thousands of enslaved people flee their masters to join his cause. At its peak, Spartacus's army swells to perhaps 70,000 men, an astonishing force of the desperate and dispossessed. For 2 years, this slave army defeats Roman legion after Roman legion, moving up and down the Italian peninsula, raiding estates and freeing slaves. The Senate, humiliated, finally sends 8 legions under the command of Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest men. In 71 BCE, Crassus corners Spartacus's army in southern Italy and crushes them in battle. Spartacus himself dies fighting, and 6,000 captured rebels are crucified along the Appian Way, Rome's main southern road, a grim warning stretching for over 100 miles. Into this turbulent world steps a man who will change everything. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in 100 BCE into an old patrician family that claimed descent from the goddess Venus herself. But Caesar's family, though noble in lineage, was not particularly wealthy or influential. The young Julius would have to forge his own path to power, and he would do so with a combination of military genius, political cunning, and sheer audacity that the Republic had never seen. Caesar's opportunity came in 58 BCE, when he secured appointment as governor of Gaul, the wild lands beyond the Alps, roughly corresponding to modern France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland. Rome controlled only a small strip of southern Gaul, and the rest was home to fierce Celtic tribes who had resisted Roman expansion for generations. What Caesar did over the next 9 years was nothing short of extraordinary. He waged a series of campaigns that would bring all of Gaul under Roman control, adding territory equivalent to the entire existing Roman Republic. The Gallic Wars were brutal beyond measure. Caesar's own writings, which he penned as propaganda to boost his reputation back in Rome, claim that in his campaigns, approximately 1 million Gauls were killed and another million enslaved out of a total population of perhaps 3 million. Whether these numbers are exact or exaggerated, the scale of devastation was immense. Entire tribes were wiped out or displaced. Yet Caesar presented himself as a civilizing force, bringing Roman order to barbarian chaos, and the people of Rome, reading his dispatches, hailed him as a hero. Caesar even pushed beyond the known world. In 55 BCE, he built a bridge across the Rhine River, a remarkable feat of engineering completed in just 10 days, and led his legions into Germania, becoming the first Roman general to cross that forbidding frontier. He didn't stay long. The expedition was more symbolic than strategic, but the message was clear. No boundary could contain Rome's ambition. That same year, Caesar launched an even more audacious venture. He crossed the narrow sea to Britannia, the mysterious island at the edge of the world, landing with 2 legions on the White Cliffs. The Britons, fighting from chariots in a style already ancient, resisted fiercely, and Caesar withdrew after a brief campaign. He returned the following year with a larger force, penetrated further inland, extracted tribute from several tribes, and then departed. Britannia would not truly become Roman for another century, but Caesar could claim to have set foot where no Roman general had gone before. Yet while Caesar won glory in Gaul, the Republic at home was tearing itself apart. The government had become hopelessly corrupt, with wealthy senators competing for power through bribery, intimidation, and violence. In 60 BCE, before leaving for Gaul, Caesar had formed a secret political alliance with 2 other powerful men, Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated general, and Crassus, the wealthy victor over Spartacus. This informal partnership, later called the First Triumvirate, essentially controlled the Republic through their combined influence, though it had no legal standing. They divided power among themselves, bypassing the traditional institutions that had governed Rome for centuries. But the triumvirate was unstable, built on ambition rather than friendship. Crassus, jealous of the military glory won by his partners, sought his own conquest. In 53 BCE, he led an army east to fight the Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival beyond the Euphrates River. At Carrhae, in the deserts of Mesopotamia, the Romans encountered Parthian horse archers whose tactics they couldn't counter. The Parthians showered the legions with arrows from a distance, never closing for the hand-to-hand combat where Roman discipline excelled. Crassus's army was destroyed, and he himself was captured and killed. According to legend, the Parthians poured molten gold down his throat, a symbolic punishment for his legendary greed. With Crassus dead, only Caesar and Pompey remained, and 2 ambitious men cannot easily share power. The tension between them grew as Caesar's term in Gaul came to an end. The Senate, fearful of Caesar's popularity and his battle-hardened legions, demanded he disband his army before returning to Rome. Caesar knew that if he returned as a private citizen, his enemies would prosecute him and destroy him. He faced an impossible choice: obey the law and face ruin, or defy the Republic itself. On January 10, 49 BCE, Caesar stood with a single legion at the Rubicon River, the boundary between his province and Italy proper. Roman law forbade any general from crossing that river with an army. To cross meant civil war. Caesar hesitated, knowing he was about to shatter centuries of tradition. Then, according to the historian Suetonius, he uttered the phrase that would echo through history: Alea acta est, the die is cast. He crossed the Rubicon, and the Republic entered its death throes. Let that image settle in your mind now. A man at a river's edge, making a choice that would change the world. Feel yourself drifting, as inevitable as that river's current, as Caesar's army marching south. The old order was ending, and though no one yet knew it, an empire was about to be born. Rest easy, rest deeply, as we move through this turning point in history, this moment when everything changed. Part 4. The Birth of Empire. Let your breathing slow even further now, in and out, as we follow Caesar across that fateful river. His march through Italy is swift and almost bloodless. Town after town opens its gates to him, and even Pompey's legions begin to desert. Pompey himself, along with much of the Senate, flees Rome in panic, sailing east across the Adriatic to gather forces. Caesar enters Rome unopposed, but he doesn't linger. He pursues Pompey across the Mediterranean in a civil war that will span 3 continents. The decisive battle comes in 48 BCE, at Pharsalus in Greece. There, Caesar's hardened veterans from Gaul face Pompey's larger, but less experienced army. Despite being outnumbered nearly 2-1, Caesar's forces shatter Pompey's lines. The great Pompey flees to Egypt, seeking refuge with the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. But Ptolemy, hoping to win Caesar's favor, has Pompey murdered the moment he steps ashore, a dishonorable end for one of Rome's greatest generals. When Caesar arrives in Egypt days later and is presented with Pompey's severed head, he reportedly weeps. Whether from genuine grief or political theater, history cannot say. In Egypt, Caesar becomes entangled in a dynastic dispute. The 21-year-old Queen Cleopatra VII is locked in a power struggle with her younger brother husband, Ptolemy. Legend tells that Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence rolled up in a carpet, though this detail may be more romance than truth. What is certain is that Caesar, now 52 years old, becomes captivated by the brilliant young queen. He takes her side in the civil war, defeats Ptolemy's forces, and installs Cleopatra as Egypt's sole ruler. Their affair produces a son, whom Cleopatra names Caesar, Little Caesar. But Caesar cannot remain in Egypt forever. He has enemies still to defeat, a republic to reshape. After crushing remaining opposition in Africa and Spain, he returns to Rome in 46 BCE as absolute master of the Roman world. The Senate, cowed and desperate to appease him, heaps honors upon him. They grant him the title of dictator, traditionally a temporary emergency position, but for Caesar, they make it first 10 years, then eventually perpetual. He is given the right to wear a laurel crown at all times, to sit on a golden chair in the Senate, and to have a statue of himself placed among those of the ancient kings. Some whisper that he wishes to be crowned king himself, though Caesar publicly refuses this title, knowing how deeply Romans despise monarchy. Caesar uses his power to implement sweeping reforms. He reorganizes the provinces, extends Roman citizenship to many in Gaul and Spain, settles his veterans in colonies throughout the empire, and undertakes massive building projects. His most lasting achievement, however, is calendar reform. The old Roman calendar had become hopelessly out of sync with the solar year, with priests having manipulated it for political purposes. In 46 BCE, Caesar introduced the Julian calendar, with its 365-day year and leap year every 4 years, a system so accurate that it would remain in use for over 16 centuries. That year of transition, 46 BCE, had to be 445 days long to realign everything. the longest year in human history. Yet for all his genius, Caesar fails to see the danger gathering around him. A group of senators, calling themselves the Liberators, plot his assassination. Some are old enemies, but others are men he pardoned and even promoted, like Marcus Junius Brutus, whom Caesar loved almost as a son. On March 15, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, Caesar attends a Senate meeting at the Theatre of Pompey. As he takes his seat, the conspirators surround him. One grabs his toga as if to ask a question, and then the daggers come out. 23 times they stab him, each conspirator wanting blood on his hands. According to Suetonius, when Caesar sees Brutus among his attackers, he utters his last words in Greek, Kai su, teknon. You too, child. He pulls his toga over his head and dies at the foot of a statue of Pompey, his old rival, murdered in the same manner 4 years earlier. The assassins believe they have saved the Republic, but they have only doomed it further. Caesar's assassination plunges Rome into another civil war, this time between the Liberators and Caesar's supporters. Into this chaos steps Caesar's 19-year-old great-nephew and adopted heir, Gaius Octavius. In Caesar's will, he had named this young man as his son and heir, and with that inheritance came Caesar's name, his wealth, and the loyalty of his veterans. The teenager, now calling himself Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, or Octavian, begins to maneuver for power with a political sophistication that belies his youth. Octavian forms an alliance with two of Caesar's most powerful supporters, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant and consul, and Marcus Lepidus, Caesar's former cavalry commander. In 43 BCE, these three men formalize their partnership as the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the first, this one has legal authority, granted by a compliant Senate. They divide the Roman world among themselves and publish prescription lists, names of enemies to be killed and their property confiscated. The purge is ruthless. Perhaps 300 senators and 2,000 equestrians are murdered, their heads displayed in the forum. Among the victims is the great orator Cicero, who had spoken out against Antony. His head and hands are nailed to the speaker's platform where he had delivered so many speeches, a gruesome silencing of the Republic's greatest voice. In 42 BCE, Octavian and Antony cross into Greece to face the armies of Brutus and Cassius, the leading assassins of Caesar. At Philippi, in 2 battles fought 3 weeks apart, the forces of the Triumvirate crush the Liberators. Both Brutus and Cassius choose suicide over capture. With their deaths, any hope of restoring the old Republic dies as well. The question now is not whether Rome will have a master, but which master it will have. Octavian takes the West, Antony the East, and Lepidus is given Africa, though he will soon be pushed aside, a minor player in a game too large for him. And now, as your consciousness grows dimmer, as you sink deeper into that space between waking and dreaming, picture the Mediterranean world divided, 2 men circling each other like gladiators in an arena, knowing that only one can emerge victorious. The Republic is dead, though some still deny it. The age of emperors is beginning, though none yet call it by that name. Rest now, drift now, as we stand at this precipice, this moment before the final transformation, when Rome becomes something it had never been before. Part 5. Augustus and the Pax Romana. Breathe slowly now, deeply, as we turn our gaze eastward, to where Mark Antony has made his headquarters. While Octavian consolidates power in Rome, Antony becomes increasingly entangled with Egypt and its captivating queen. Cleopatra, who had been Caesar's lover and borne him a son, now turns her considerable charm and intelligence toward Antony. In 41 BCE, she sails to meet him at Tarsus in a magnificent barge with purple sails and silver oars, herself dressed as the goddess Venus. Antony is enchanted, not just by her beauty, but by her wit, her education, and the vast wealth of Egypt that she controls. Their relationship becomes both romantic and political. Antony and Cleopatra marry in 36 BCE, though Antony is already married to Octavian's sister, Octavia, a union meant to seal the alliance between the two triumvirs. Antony's Eastern marriage is seen in Rome as a betrayal, and Octavian skillfully uses propaganda to paint his rival as a man who has abandoned Roman values, besotted by an Eastern queen who wishes to rule Rome from Alexandria. When Antony makes donations of Roman territories to Cleopatra and their children in a grand ceremony, crowning her Queen of Kings, Octavian has all the ammunition he needs. In 32 BCE, Octavian takes the extraordinary step of seizing Antony's will from the Temple of Vesta, where it had been stored. He reads it aloud to the Senate, revealing that Antony wishes to be buried in Alexandria rather than Rome, and that he recognizes Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, as Caesar's legitimate heir. This is a direct challenge to Octavian's own claim to be Caesar's son. The Senate, guided by Octavian's hand, strips Antony of his powers and declares war, not on Antony himself, but cleverly on Cleopatra, painting this as a foreign threat rather than a civil war between Romans. The final confrontation comes on September 2nd, 31 BCE, at Actium, off the western coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet faces Octavian's navy, commanded by his brilliant admiral Agrippa. The battle is not the epic clash that might be imagined. As the fighting begins, Cleopatra suddenly orders her 60 ships to break through the battle lines and flee south toward Egypt. Antony, seeing her purple sails departing, abandons his own fleet and follows her in a single ship. His fleet, leaderless and demoralized, surrenders. It is less a defeat than a collapse, a crumbling of will. Octavian pursues the lovers to Egypt. In July of 30 BCE, as Octavian's forces close in on Alexandria, Antony receives false news that Cleopatra has killed herself. In despair, he falls on his sword, but the wound is not immediately fatal. He is carried, dying, to Cleopatra's monument where she has barricaded herself, and is hoisted up through a window to die in her arms. Days later, Cleopatra herself chooses death over being paraded through Rome in Octavian's triumph. According to legend, she allows a poisonous asp, an Egyptian cobra, to bite her, though the true method of her suicide remains uncertain. She is found dead on August 12, 30 BCE, dressed in her royal regalia, lying on a golden couch. Octavian has her son Caesarion hunted down and killed, eliminating any rival claim to Caesar's legacy. With their deaths, the 3,000-year-old line of Egyptian pharaohs comes to an end, and Egypt becomes a Roman province, not a senatorial province, but Octavian's personal possession. At 33 years old, Octavian stands as the sole ruler of the entire Roman world. He has eliminated every rival, conquered every enemy, and holds more power than any Roman before him. Yet he is wise enough to know that open monarchy cost his adoptive father his life. So he embarks on a careful, gradual transformation of the state, creating an empire in all but name, while maintaining the fiction that the Republic still exists. In 27 BCE, Octavian appears before the Senate in a carefully staged moment of political theater. He announces that he is returning all his powers to the Senate and people of Rome, restoring the Republic. The senators, in a response that is both genuine relief and careful choreography, beg him to reconsider. They heap honors upon him and grant him a new name, Augustus, meaning the revered one, a title with religious overtones that had never been used for a mortal before. He accepts command of the provinces where most of the legions are stationed, effective control of Rome's military power, while maintaining that he is merely the first citizen, the princeps. The date of this settlement, January 16, 27 BCE, marks the true beginning of the Roman Empire, though no one calls it that. To the people of Rome, the Republic continues. In reality, Augustus is emperor in everything but title. Augustus proves to be a ruler of extraordinary skill. He reorganizes the provinces, creates a professional standing army with fixed terms of service, establishes the Praetorian Guard as his personal bodyguard in Rome, and initiates building projects that transform the city. He boasts that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. The Forum of Augustus, the Theatre of Marcellus, the Pantheon, all rise during his reign. He encourages moral reforms, promotes marriage and childbearing among citizens, and patronizes poets like Virgil, whose Aeneid establishes a mythical foundation for Roman greatness, tracing the city's origins to the Trojan prince Aeneas. Under Augustus, the empire enjoys unprecedented peace and prosperity. The civil wars that have ravaged the Mediterranean world for decades finally end. Borders are secure, trade flourishes, and Roman law extends from Britain to Syria, from the Rhine to the Sahara. This period becomes known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a golden age that will last, with few interruptions, for 2 centuries. Augustus rules for 41 years, longer than almost any Roman leader before him, dying peacefully in his bed in 14 CE at the age of 75. His last words, according to those present, were directed to his friends. "Have I played the part well? Then applaud as I exit." It is a fitting end for a man who understood that politics is theater, and who played his role to perfection. Let those words echo in your mind as you drift deeper, deeper still. Have I played the part well? Augustus transformed Rome from republic to empire, from chaos to order, from civil war to peace. He created a system that would endure for centuries, ruling an empire that stretched across the known world. Feel yourself sinking now, as Rome rose, surrendering to sleep as Augustus surrendered to mortality, knowing that the story continues, that the empire he built will outlast him by centuries, that the peace he established will shelter millions yet unborn. Rest in this golden age, and dream of marble cities gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. Part 6. The Julio-Claudian Dynasty. Let your eyelids grow heavier now, so heavy, as we enter the reign of Augustus's successor. After his chosen heirs died one by one, his nephew Marcellus, his general Agrippa, his grandsons Gaius and Lucius, Augustus was forced to adopt his stepson Tiberius. When Augustus died in 14 CE, Tiberius became the second emperor at age 55. Tiberius ruled for 23 years as a skilled administrator who maintained borders and filled the treasury. Yet he was uncomfortable with Augustus's diplomatic style. Where Augustus charmed the Senate, Tiberius was blunt and withdrawn, growing paranoid about conspiracies. In 26 CE, he did something unprecedented. He left Rome entirely, retiring to Capri and governing from his island villa. He would never resign, ruling from this retreat for the final 11 years until his death in 37 CE. The throne passed to his 24-year-old great-nephew, Caligula, nicknamed Little Boots for the miniature soldier's boots he wore as a child in military camps. Romans welcomed him joyfully as son of the beloved general Germanicus. For 6 months, he was generous and popular. Then in October 37 CE, Caligula fell seriously ill. When he recovered, he seemed transformed, erratic and cruel. He declared himself a living god, made his horse Incitatus a priest and threatened to make him consul. He emptied Tiberius's treasury on extravagances, built a bridge of boats across the Bay of Naples simply to ride across it, and ordered arbitrary executions. After less than 4 years, the Praetorian Guard assassinated him in January 41 CE. He was just 28. The Praetorians found Caligula's uncle Claudius hiding behind a curtain, terrified. Claudius was 50, considered unfit for public life. He stammered, limped, and drooled, likely from cerebral palsy. But the Praetorians declared him emperor on the spot, the first time they had chosen an emperor. Yet Claudius surprised everyone, proving intelligent and effective. In 43 CE, he launched a full invasion of Britannia with 4 legions. Claudius himself traveled to witness the capture of Camulodunum, remaining 16 days before returning to celebrate a triumph. He also annexed Thrace and Mauritania, expanding the empire more than any emperor since Augustus. In 54 CE, Claudius died after eating poisoned mushrooms, likely orchestrated by his wife Agrippina to place her 17-year-old son Nero on the throne. Nero's early years, guided by philosopher Seneca, were remarkably good. Reduced taxes, Senate authority restored. These first 5 years, the Quinquennum Neronis, brought prosperity. But Nero's reign deteriorated. He became obsessed with performing as artist and musician, which Romans considered beneath imperial dignity. He murdered his mother Agrippina in 59 CE, first trying a collapsible boat, then sending assassins when she survived. In 64 CE, the Great Fire burned for 6 days, destroying much of Rome. Though Nero was 35 miles away in Antium, rumors spread that he started it. The legend of him fiddling is false, but it captures public perception. Seeking scapegoats, Nero blamed Christians, initiating the first imperial persecution. They were torn apart by dogs, crucified, or burned as human torches in his gardens. Among the victims were likely the apostles Peter and Paul. By 68 CE, Nero had alienated everyone. When the Praetorian Guard withdrew support, he fled Rome. Declared a public enemy, hearing soldiers approach to arrest him, he committed suicide on June 9, 68 CE, at age 30. His last words, "What an artist dies in me." With his death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended after nearly a century. Feel these troubled years settling over you like a blanket. Caligula's madness, Claudius's unexpected competence, Nero's cruelty. Let them fade like ripples on water, like consciousness slipping away. The dynasty has ended, but Rome endures, as you endure in your journey toward sleep. Part 7. Flavians and the 5 Good Emperors. Your breathing is slow now, peaceful, rhythmic as the tides. With Nero's death, the empire plunges into chaos. The year 68 CE becomes the year of the 4 emperors. Galba is murdered after 7 months, Otho after 3 months, Vitellius after 8 months. By December 69 CE, Vespasian's forces capture Rome. 4 emperors in 18 months. But Vespasian will prove different. Vespasian was 60 when he became emperor, a career soldier of modest birth. Where the Julio-Claudians played at divinity, Vespasian was blunt and unpretentious. On his deathbed in 79 CE, he joked, "Dear me, I think I'm becoming a god," mocking the tradition of deifying emperors. His reign brought stability and fiscal responsibility. Vespasian's enduring legacy rises from Nero's Golden Palace. Where Nero built an artificial lake, Vespasian orders construction of an enormous amphitheater. The Flavian Amphitheater, later the Colosseum, designed to hold 50,000 to 80,000 spectators. Construction begins in 72 CE, funded partly by treasures from Jerusalem's temple after suppressing the Jewish revolt. It stands today, nearly 2,000 years later, the most iconic symbol of Roman engineering. When Vespasian dies in 79 CE, power passes to his son Titus, the first father-to-son succession since the Republic's end. Just 2 months later, Mount Vesuvius erupts on August 24, 79 CE. Pompeii and Herculaneum are buried under ash and pumice. Pliny the Elder, attempting rescue by sea, is overcome by toxic fumes. Titus responds with compassion, providing aid and traveling to the disaster personally. The following year, fire ravages Rome, then plague strikes. Through it all, Titus remains generous, earning the title the delight of mankind. Titus dies in 81 CE after only 2 years and 2 months, succeeded by his brother Domitian, who rules 15 years. Domitian is an effective administrator but paranoid and autocratic, insisting on being called Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. In 96 CE, he is assassinated by household staff fearing execution. With Domitian's murder, the Flavian dynasty ends. The Senate chooses elderly Nova, who rules 16 months before dying. Having no children, he adopts General Trajan as heir, choosing merit over bloodline. This begins the era of the 5 Good Emperors, nearly a century of greatest extent and prosperity. Trajan, the first emperor born outside Italy and Hispania, rules 98 to 117 CE. Under him, Rome achieves maximum territorial extent. In 106 CE, he conquers Dacia, modern Romania, gaining gold and silver. His greatest achievement comes in 113 to 117 CE, when legions push to the Persian Gulf. Never before or again will Rome's borders reach so far. To celebrate, Trajan erects a 100-foot column carved with spiral relief of his Dacian campaigns, still standing in Trajan's Forum. When Trajan dies in 117 CE, returning from eastern campaigns, power passes to his adopted heir Hadrian. Where Trajan conquered, Hadrian consolidates. He recognizes the empire's practical limits, focusing on defense rather than expansion. He even withdraws from some eastern conquests. Instead, he spends his 21-year reign traveling throughout the empire, inspecting defenses, immersing in local cultures. He wears a beard in Greek fashion, the first emperor to do so. Hadrian's most famous construction is the wall built across northern Britain in 122 CE. Stretching 73 miles coast to coast, Hadrian's wall marks the northernmost boundary, separating Roman Britain from unconquered Caledonia. Built of stone with forts every mile and turrets between, the wall declares, "This far and no farther." Much still stands today, winding across English countryside. Let these images settle: the Colosseum rising, Vesuvius erupting, Trajan's column spiraling, Hadrian's wall stretching across misty hills. Feel yourself drifting along that wall, each mile taking you deeper into sleep. The empire is at its height, secure and prosperous. Rest in this golden age and let history carry you deeper into slumber. Part 8. The Philosopher Emperor and the Coming Storm. Your body is completely relaxed now, heavy and still, as we continue through Rome's golden afternoon. When Hadrian dies in 138 CE, having carefully chosen his successor, power passes to Antoninus Pius, who earns his surname Pius for his devotion to Hadrian's memory and his insistence on the Senate deifying his predecessor. Antoninus rules for 23 years, from 138 to 161 CE, and his reign is so peaceful that historians struggle to find dramatic events to record. No major wars, no great crises, just steady, competent administration. It is perhaps the quietest, most stable period in Roman history, a testament to how well the imperial system can function under a capable and modest ruler. When Antoninus dies peacefully at age 74, he leaves the empire prosperous and secure. The throne then passes to Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most remarkable emperor Rome will ever know. Born in 121 CE, Marcus has been groomed for power since childhood, educated in philosophy, rhetoric, and law. He is a devoted Stoic philosopher, believing in duty, self-discipline, and acceptance of fate. Yet this philosopher, who would prefer to spend his days in contemplation and study, will spend most of his 19-year reign on campaign, defending Rome's borders against unprecedented threats. It is as if the universe has played a cruel joke, giving Rome a philosopher king precisely when it needs a warrior. Marcus's reign begins in 161 CE with an ominous sign. He insists on sharing power equally with his adoptive brother Lucius Verus, creating a co-emperorship, the first time Rome has had two Augusti ruling simultaneously. Though well-intentioned, it sets a precedent for divided rule that will later contribute to the empire's fragmentation. Verus dies in 169 CE, possibly of plague, leaving Marcus to rule alone. But the damage from this period is already done. Roman armies returning from campaigns in Parthia bring with them a devastating plague, possibly smallpox or measles, that sweeps through the empire. The Antonine Plague, as it comes to be known, rages from 165 to 180 CE, killing millions, perhaps as many as one-third of the population in some regions. The empire's golden age is ending in pestilence. As if plague were not enough, Rome's northern borders come under intense pressure. Germanic tribes, the Marcomanni, Quadi, and others, begin pushing across the Danube River into imperial territory. In 167 CE, they penetrate as far as northern Italy, threatening Rome itself for the first time in centuries. Marcus spends the last 14 years of his life on the northern frontier, personally commanding armies in what are called the Marcomannic Wars. He establishes his headquarters at Carnuntum on the Danube, and it is in these military camps, surrounded by war and death, that he writes his private philosophical reflections. These writings, never meant for publication, survive as the Meditations, one of the greatest works of Stoic philosophy, an emperor's intimate thoughts on duty, mortality, and the nature of existence. Despite his philosophical wisdom and his devotion to duty, Marcus Aurelius makes what many consider the greatest mistake of his reign. He breaks the precedent of adoptive succession that has served Rome so well for nearly a century. Instead of choosing the most capable man to succeed him, he designates his biological son, Commodus. Perhaps Marcus loves his son too much to see his flaws, or perhaps he fears civil war if he passes over his own child. Whatever his reasoning, when Marcus dies of illness in 180 CE at his military camp near modern Vienna, at the age of 58, he leaves the empire to a 19-year-old who is utterly unfit to rule. Commodus is everything his father was not: vain, cruel, and uninterested in governance. He immediately makes peace with the Germanic tribes, abandoning the hard-won victories his father had achieved, and returns to Rome to indulge his appetites. He becomes obsessed with gladiatorial combat, fighting in the arena himself, though always against carefully selected, weakened opponents or wild animals that posed no real danger. He claims to be the reincarnation of Hercules and appears publicly dressed in a lion's skin, carrying a club. He renames Rome Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus, and insists that the months of the year be renamed after his many titles. Senators and citizens who displease him are executed on the slightest pretext. The empire suffers under his misrule for 12 years. Finally, on the last day of 192 CE, a conspiracy forms involving his mistress Marcia, his chamberlain, and the praetorian prefect. They attempt to poison him, but when Commodus vomits up the poison, they send an athlete named Narcissus to strangle him in his bath. He dies at age 31, and with him dies the Antonine dynasty. The era of the 5 good emperors is over, ended by Marcus Aurelius's one great failure: his love for an unworthy son. What follows Commodus's death is chaos once again. The year of the 5 emperors in 193 CE sees the empire auctioned off by the Praetorian Guard to the highest bidder, a wealthy senator named Didius Julianus, who lasts just 66 days before being executed. Provincial armies proclaim their own candidates, and civil war erupts. Eventually, Septimius Severus, commander of the Pannonian legions, marches on Rome and seizes power, establishing a new dynasty. But something fundamental has changed. Severus's dying advice to his sons reveals the new reality of imperial power. He tells them, "Enrich the soldiers and scorn all other men." The emperor now depends not on the Senate's approval or the people's love, but on the army's loyalty, bought with gold and paid for with the empire's future. The 3rd century dawns with storm clouds gathering. The Pax Romana is fraying. Plague has weakened the population, wars have drained the treasury, and the army has tasted its power to make and unmake emperors. The provinces that once sent tribute to Rome now require expensive garrisons to defend them. The Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine and Danube are growing more organized and aggressive. In the east, the Parthian Empire has fallen, replaced by the more vigorous and militaristic Sassanid Persian Empire, which will prove a far more dangerous enemy. Rome stands at a crossroads, still powerful, still vast, but facing challenges that will test whether the empire can adapt or will slowly crumble. Feel yourself at this turning point, this moment between eras, suspended between the golden light of the Antonine Age and the gathering shadows of crisis. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful, like the empire itself pausing before the storm. Let these last peaceful moments wash over you. Marcus writing his meditations by lamplight, the legions standing watch on distant frontiers, the empire at its fullest flowering before the long twilight begins. Rest here, in this moment of transition, and let sleep claim you as time claimed Rome's golden age, gently and inevitably. Part 9. The Crisis of the 3rd Century. Close your eyes completely now. Let them remain closed, as we drift into darker waters. The 3rd century brings Rome to the brink of collapse in what historians call the Crisis of the 3rd Century, a 50-year period from 235 to 284 CE, when the empire nearly tears itself apart. During these 5 turbulent decades, Rome suffers through the reigns of more than 50 emperors and usurpers, most ruling for only a few months or years before being assassinated or killed in battle. The average reign lasts just 2.5 years. The imperial throne, once the most secure position in the world, becomes a death sentence. The crisis begins in earnest in 235 CE when the Emperor Severus Alexander, the last of the Severan dynasty, is murdered by his own soldiers while on campaign in Germania. He is just 26 years old. The troops proclaim Maximinus Thrax, a giant of a man who allegedly stood over 8 feet tall, as emperor. Maximinus is the first emperor who never even visits Rome during his reign, governing entirely from military camps. His 3-year rule sets the pattern for decades to come. Emperors chosen by armies, ruling through military force, overthrown by other armies proclaiming their own candidates. The Senate becomes irrelevant, a ceremonial body watching helplessly as soldiers auction the empire to the highest bidder. The external threats compound the internal chaos. On the eastern frontier, the Sassanid Persian Empire under King Shapur I proves far more aggressive than the Parthians ever were. In 260 CE, in one of Rome's most humiliating defeats, the Emperor Valerian is captured in battle by Shapur's forces near Edessa. This is unprecedented. Never before has a Roman emperor been taken prisoner by a foreign enemy. According to Persian accounts, Shapur uses Valerian as a footstool when mounting his horse, and when the emperor eventually dies in captivity, his skin is stuffed with straw and displayed in a Persian temple as a trophy. Whether these details are true or propaganda, the message is clear. Rome is no longer invincible. Meanwhile, the northern frontiers collapse under relentless Germanic pressure. The Goths, Alemanni, Franks, and other tribes pour across the Rhine and Danube, raiding deep into imperial territory. In 251 CE, the Emperor Decius is killed fighting the Goths at the Battle of Abritus, becoming the first Roman emperor to die in battle against a foreign enemy. His entire army is destroyed. The provinces of Dacia, so proudly conquered by Trajan a century and a half earlier, are abandoned to barbarian settlement. Germanic war bands reach as far as Greece, sacking Athens in 267 CE. The frontiers that Hadrian had so carefully fortified seem to dissolve like morning mist. Adding to these military disasters, plague strikes again. The Plague of Cyprian, named after the bishop who described it, ravages the empire from 249 to 262 CE. Ancient sources describe symptoms of fever, diarrhea, vomiting, and gangrene of the hands and feet. At its peak, the plague allegedly kills 5,000 people a day in Rome alone. Combined with constant warfare, the empire's population plummets. Fields lie untilled as farmers flee or die. Trade networks collapse. Cities shrink behind their walls. The prosperity of the Pax Romana seems like a distant dream. The empire fragments further when military commanders in outlying regions declare independence rather than wait for inevitable invasion. In 260 CE, Postumus, commander of the Rhine legions, establishes the breakaway Gallic Empire, which includes Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania, fully one-third of Rome's western provinces. This Gallic Empire maintains its own emperors, mints its own coins, and operates independently for 15 years. Meanwhile, in the east, the wealthy city of Palmyra in Syria becomes effectively independent under Queen Zenobia, who rules in the name of her young son. At its height around 270 CE, Zenobia's Palmyrene Empire controls Syria, Egypt, and much of Asia Minor. The Roman Empire has been reduced to just Italy, the Balkans, and North Africa, fragmented into 3 competing states. Yet even in this darkest hour, Rome produces leaders capable of fighting back. The Emperor Claudius II, who ruled from 268 to 270 CE, wins a major victory over the Goths at the Battle of Naissus in 269 CE, allegedly killing 50,000 Gothic warriors and gaining the title Gothicus. Though he dies of plague shortly after, having ruled for less than 2 years, his victory halts the Gothic advance and demonstrates that Rome can still defend itself. His cavalry commander and successor, Aurelian, proves even more formidable. Aurelian rules for only 5 years, from 270 to 275 CE. But in that brief time he earns the title Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. With ruthless efficiency, he reconquers the breakaway territories. In 272 CE, he marches east and defeats Zenobia's forces, capturing the Palmyrene queen and bringing her back to Rome in golden chains to march in his triumph. The following year, he turns west and defeats the last emperor of the Gallic Empire, reuniting all of Rome's territories under a single ruler. Yet even Aurelian recognizes that Rome has changed. He builds massive walls around the city of Rome itself, the Aurelian Walls, acknowledging that even the capital is no longer safe from attack. These walls, standing 20 feet high and stretching for 12 miles, enclose the city in stone. It is an admission that the age of Roman invincibility is over, but also a statement of defiance. Rome will endure, protected if necessary by walls, but it will endure. Despite his achievements, Aurelian falls victim to the era's instability. In 275 CE, while on campaign, he is assassinated by his own officers based on a false document suggesting he planned to execute them. The crisis continues, emperor after emperor rising and falling like waves on a stormy sea. Yet the worst is passing. The military reforms, the fortifications, the hard-won victories are stabilizing the frontiers. The empire is smaller, poorer, more militarized, but it survives. And on the horizon, a soldier from Dalmatia named Diocles is rising through the ranks, a man who will transform the empire so completely that Rome will never be the same again. Let the tumult of these years flow through your mind and fade away. Emperors crowned and killed, armies marching and retreating, cities besieged and relieved. Feel it all washing over you like distant thunder, troubling but remote. You are safe in this moment, floating peacefully as Rome survived its crucible. The crisis will end, as all things end, as waking ends in sleep. Breathe slowly, release the tension of these turbulent decades, and drift deeper still, toward the transformation that awaits. Part 10. Diocletian's Revolution and Constantine's Vision. You are deeply relaxed now, barely aware, drifting in twilight between consciousness and dreams. In 284 CE, the legions proclaim yet another soldier emperor, Diocles, son of a freedman from Dalmatia. He changes his name to Diocletian and immediately transforms the empire in ways that will reshape it forever. Where previous emperors preserved the old Augustan system, Diocletian recognizes the world has changed and Rome must change with it or perish. Diocletian's most radical innovation comes in 293 CE when he establishes the Tetrarchy, rule by four. He divides the empire into eastern and western halves, each ruled by a senior Augustus assisted by Junior Caesar who serves as aeon commander. Diocletian takes the eastern Augustus position, headquartering at Nicomedia in Asia Minor rather than Rome. His colleague Maximian becomes Western Augustus, based in Mediolanum, modern Milan. The city of Rome, the empire's heart for 1,000 years, is no longer an imperial residence. It has become ceremonial, honored but irrelevant to governance. This division plants seeds that will eventually split the empire permanently. To stabilize the economy ravaged by crisis, Diocletian attempts unprecedented intervention. In 301 CE, he issues the Edict on Maximum Prices, fixing by law prices of over 1,000 goods and services, from wheat and wine to legal fees and teacher salaries, even specifying maximum wages for every profession. It is perhaps the most ambitious price control ever attempted in the ancient world. However, it largely fails. When prices are set below market value, goods disappear from legal sale, moving to black markets. The edict is eventually abandoned, but demonstrates Diocletian's willingness to use state power in radically new ways. Diocletian also transforms the imperial image. Where Augustus maintained the fiction of being first among equals, Diocletian embraces absolute monarchy openly. He adopts elaborate Eastern ceremonies, requiring all to prostrate themselves in the Persian manner called proskynesis. He wears purple silk robes and jeweled diadems, presenting himself as a living god. The modest princeps has become the dominus, the lord, an autocrat whose word is law. Yet despite his autocratic style, Diocletian shows remarkable wisdom. In 305 CE, after 21 years, he does something no Roman emperor has done voluntarily. He abdicates. He forces Maximian to abdicate as well, allowing their Caesars to step up as planned. Diocletian retires to a magnificent palace in his homeland, modern Split, Croatia, spending his final years tending vegetable gardens. When former colleagues beg him to return as the Tetrarchy collapses into civil war, he reportedly replies they should see the cabbages he is growing. If they knew how beautiful they would never ask him to return. He dies peacefully around 311 CE, one of the very few emperors to die of natural causes in retirement. But Diocletian's succession plan crumbles after his retirement. The Tetrarchy dissolves into civil war. Multiple claimants fight for supremacy, and once again the empire seems poised to fragment. From this chaos emerges Constantine, son of one of the Tetrarchs, proclaimed emperor by his father's troops in Britannia in 306 CE. Constantine fights to supremacy over 18 years, defeating rival after rival. The decisive moment comes October 28, 312 CE, at the Milvian Bridge north of Rome. Constantine faces Maxentius's army, who controls Italy. According to Christian historians, Constantine sees a vision, a cross of light with Greek words, en teutonica. In this sign, conquer. That night, he dreams Christ tells him to paint the Chi-Rho, the first two letters of Christ in Greek, on his soldiers' shields. Constantine obeys, wins decisively as Maxentius drowns in the Tiber during retreat, and attributes his triumph to the Christian God. Whether this vision was genuine experience, political calculation, or pious invention, its consequences are profound. In 313 CE, Constantine and co-emperor Licinius issue the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance and specifically legalizing Christianity. For the first time, Christianity moves from persecuted sect to legally protected religion. Constantine goes further, personally favoring Christians, funding church construction, involving himself in theological disputes. By his death, Christianity has transformed from a minority religion, perhaps 10% of the population, to a favored faith with imperial patronage. Constantine's other great act is founding a new capital. In 324 CE, after defeating Licinius and becoming sole emperor, he chooses ancient Byzantium as the site for a new Rome, a Christian capital for a Christianizing empire. Over 6 years, he transforms the modest city into a magnificent metropolis with forums, palaces, churches, and massive walls. On May 11, 330 CE, he formally dedicates it as Nova Roma, New Rome, though it quickly becomes known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Built on strategic straits between Europe and Asia, controlling trade routes between the Mediterranean and Black Seas, Constantinople will become the greatest medieval city, outlasting Rome by a millennium. Constantine rules as sole emperor until death in 337 CE, having reigned 31 years. He dies at age 65, baptized on his deathbed as was common when baptism was delayed to wash away lifetime sins. He is buried in the Church of the Holy Apostles in his new capital, in a tomb surrounded by memorials to the 12 apostles, symbolically placing himself as the 13th, equal to those who walked with Christ. It is astonishing for a man who spent most of his life as a pagan warrior, who killed rivals mercilessly, who executed his own wife and eldest son on suspicion of treason. Yet his legacy is undeniable. He has given Christianity imperial approval, shifted the empire's center eastward, and set Rome on a path it will follow until its end. Let these transformations wash over you, the empire divided and reunited, old gods giving way to new, the capital moving from ancient Rome to new Constantinople. Feel yourself floating eastward with the empire's center, drifting toward that city on the Bosphorus, toward a future that is Christian and Byzantine rather than pagan and Roman. Your breathing is so slow, barely perceptible, as you slip deeper into rest. The ancient world transforms around you, but you are safe, suspended in this moment of change, carried gently toward whatever dreams await. Part 11. The Empire Divided. You are completely at peace now, your mind quiet, your body still, as we drift through the decades following Constantine's death. When Constantine dies in 337 CE, he leaves the empire to his three surviving sons, who immediately plunge into civil war against each other and various other relatives. By 353 CE, only one son remains, Constantius II, who rules the reunited empire alone. But the pattern has been set. The empire is simply too vast, too complex, too threatened on too many fronts for one man to govern effectively. Division becomes not just convenient, but necessary. The last emperor to truly rule both East and West is Theodosius I, who reigns from 379 to 395 CE. Theodosius is a Spanish general elevated to the purple after yet another military disaster on the northern frontier. In 378 CE, just 1 year before Theodosius becomes emperor, the Eastern Roman army suffers a catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Adrianople in Thrace. A massive force of Goths, not raiders this time, but an entire people migrating in desperation, fleeing the terrifying Huns pushing westward from the Asian steppes, destroys the Roman army. The Emperor Valens himself dies in the battle, and 2/3 of the Eastern army, perhaps 20,000 men, are killed. It is Rome's worst defeat since Cannae, over 600 years earlier, and it demonstrates that the Germanic peoples are no longer disorganized barbarians, but formidable military forces capable of destroying Roman legions in open battle. Theodosius negotiates a settlement with the Goths, allowing them to settle within the empire as federates, autonomous communities obligated to provide military service. It is a pragmatic solution to an impossible problem, but it means that large groups of armed barbarians now live within Roman borders, following their own laws and leaders. The empire is becoming a patchwork of Roman and non-Roman populations, its military increasingly composed of Germanic soldiers serving under Germanic generals. The old distinction between Roman and barbarian grows blurrier with each passing decade. Theodosius's most lasting impact concerns religion. In 380 CE, he issues the Edict of Thessalonica, declaring Nicene Christianity, the form of Christianity endorsed at the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, to be the only legitimate religion of the Roman Empire. All other forms of Christianity are declared heretical, and pagan worship is officially banned. In 391 CE, he orders the closure of all pagan temples throughout the empire. The ancient gods who had watched over Rome for 1,000 years, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and all the rest, are now forbidden. The Vestal Virgins, who had tended Rome's sacred flame since the city's legendary founding, are disbanded. The Olympic Games, held every 4 years since 776 BCE, are abolished as a pagan festival. Christianity has moved from persecuted minority to tolerated religion to mandatory state faith in less than 80 years. When Theodosius dies in 395 CE, he divides the empire between his two young sons. Arcadius, age 17, receives the east, with his capital at Constantinople. Honorius, age 10, receives the west, initially ruling from Mediolanum, though he will soon move his capital to the more defensible city of Ravenna on Italy's Adriatic coast. This division, meant to be administrative, becomes permanent. Never again will the Roman Empire be ruled by a single emperor. The East and West will drift apart, developing different priorities, different threats, and eventually different identities. The Western Empire's situation grows increasingly desperate. In the winter of 406 CE, the Rhine River freezes solid, and a massive wave of Germanic peoples, Vandals, Alans, Suevi, and Burgundians, cross the frozen river into Gaul. The Rhine frontier, defended for centuries, simply collapses. These peoples spread across Gaul and into Hispania, establishing kingdoms on Roman soil. Meanwhile, Britain's garrison is withdrawn to defend Italy, leaving the province defenseless. By 410 CE, Rome effectively abandons Britain after nearly 4 centuries of rule, and the island descends into the chaos from which it will eventually emerge as Anglo-Saxon England. In 408 CE, the Western Empire suffers another blow when the Magister Militum, the master of soldiers and effective military dictator, Stilicho, is executed on Honorius's orders. Stilicho, who was himself of Vandal descent, had been the Western Empire's most capable general, the man who had held together the fraying frontiers through skill and determination. His execution removes the last effective defender of Italy at precisely the worst moment. The Gothic leader Alaric, who had been negotiating for land and status for his people, sees Stilicho's death as betrayal and an opportunity. He marches his army south toward Rome. On August 24, 410 CE, Alaric's Visigoths enter Rome through the Salarian Gate, which someone opens from inside. Whether through treachery or desperation, history does not record. For 3 days, the Goths plunder the Eternal City. They are relatively restrained by the standards of ancient warfare. Alaric, who is himself a Christian, orders his men not to harm those who take refuge in churches, and the physical destruction is limited. But the psychological impact reverberates throughout the world. Rome has not been captured by a foreign enemy in 800 years, not since the Gauls briefly occupied it in 387 BCE. The city that once conquered the world, that claimed to be eternal, has fallen. In distant Bethlehem, St. Jerome writes, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." In North Africa, St. Augustine begins writing The City of God, arguing that the heavenly kingdom matters more than any earthly empire. Yet remarkably, Rome endures. Alaric dies shortly after the sack, probably of disease, and his people move on, eventually settling in southern Gaul and Hispania. The Western Empire continues, though each year it controls less territory, commands fewer resources, and relies more heavily on barbarian generals and federate troops. The emperors in Ravenna become figureheads, puppets manipulated by Germanic military strongmen who hold the real power but cannot claim the throne themselves, lacking Roman legitimacy. The empire has become a fiction maintained by inertia and the lack of any clear alternative, a ghost of its former self slowly fading from the world. Feel yourself drifting with this fading empire. Feel the weight of centuries pressing down, the slow dissolution of ancient certainties. The Western Empire is dying, but so slowly, so gradually, that those living through it can barely perceive the change. Like sleep creeping over consciousness, the transformation is imperceptible until suddenly you are somewhere else entirely. Let yourself go now. Release your grip on waking, and float deeper into the gathering darkness of history's twilight, where the ancient world gives way to something new. Part 12. The Fall of the West. You are in the deepest realm of rest now, drifting in that quiet space where time loosens and the past unfolds. The Western Roman Empire enters its final decades like a rudderless ship, pushed by forces it can no longer command. In 429 CE, the Vandals, already hardened from campaigns in Gaul and Hispania, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar into North Africa under their king, Gaiseric. Within 10 years, they seized Roman Africa, capturing Carthage in 439 CE. This is devastating. North Africa had long been Rome's breadbasket, supplying essential grain to its population. With its loss, the Western Empire forfeits not only territory but its economic backbone. The Vandals also seized the Roman fleet anchored in Carthage and transformed themselves from land-based warriors into powerful Mediterranean raiders, launching unchecked attacks along Italy's coasts. In 451 CE, the Western Empire confronts what may have been its greatest crisis. Attila the Hun, feared across the world and called the Scourge of God by Romans, leads his massive army into Gaul. The Huns were nomadic horsemen from the Asian steppes whose westward push had driven Germanic peoples into Roman lands like falling dominoes. Attila commands roughly 30 to 50,000 Hunnic fighters, supported by subject Germanic tribes. After devastating the Eastern Empire and extracting huge tribute from Constantinople, he turns westward, demanding marriage to the Western Emperor's sister and half the empire as her dowry. Desperate, the Romans under General Aetius do the unexpected. They unite with old enemies. The Visigoths, who had sacked Rome only 40 years earlier, join them, along with Franks, Burgundians, and other Germanic groups now living in the western provinces. In June 451 CE, at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, or Chalons, this coalition meets Attila's horde. Ancient writers exaggerate the numbers, claiming 150,000 to 300,000 warriors, but the scale is undeniably immense. The Visigothic king Theodoric is killed, yet Attila is halted. It is not a decisive Roman victory, for Attila retreats intact and invades Italy the next year. But the battle proves that Rome can still muster strength when its survival hangs in the balance. In 452 CE, Attila invades Italy, advancing toward Rome itself. Yet he never enters the city. According to tradition, Pope Leo I travels north to meet him and somehow convinces him to withdraw. Whether it was Leo's persuasion, the promise of tribute, fear of disease among Attila's troops, or reports of Eastern Roman forces preparing a counterattack, we cannot know. But Attila withdraws and dies the following year in 453 CE on his wedding night, likely from a burst blood vessel or choking on his own blood after a drunken nosebleed. His death shatters the Hunnic Empire almost instantly, releasing the enormous pressure it had exerted on Rome's borders. But this reprieve arrives too late. On June 16, 455 CE, Gaisaric's Vandals sail from Carthage to the mouth of the Tiber and march into Rome, which offers no resistance. For 14 days they plunder the city thoroughly, stripping gold, silver, art, and even the bronze roof tiles of the Temple of Jupiter. They also seize thousands of captives, including the widow and daughters of the previous emperor, and sail back to Carthage. This sack is far more severe than the Visigoth plundering in 410 CE, and gives us the modern word vandalism. Rome has now been sacked twice within 4 to 5 years, an unimaginable disgrace to what had once been the invincible heart of an empire. During the Western Empire's final decades, a series of short-lived emperors rise and fall, most ruling briefly before being deposed or killed. Real authority lies with Germanic military commanders who govern in their names. One such figure, Ricimer, holds power from 456 to 472 CE, creating and destroying 5 emperors while he rules behind the throne. The empire itself has dwindled to little more than Italy, and even there its control is uncertain. Former provinces no longer send taxes to Rome. Instead, they support their own Germanic kings. The administrative machinery that once governed a vast world, tax collectors, courts, and the bureaucracy, breaks down. In 475 CE, the Germanic general Ares refuses to become emperor but places his teenage son on the throne, naming him Romulus Augustus. The symbolism is striking. Romulus, Rome's legendary founder, and Augustus, its first emperor, combined in the name of the very last Western emperor. The boy is about 14, earning the nickname Augustulus, meaning Little Augustus. His authority is hollow. He is a puppet ruling over an empire that is almost completely dissolved. On September 4th, 476 CE, another Germanic general, Odoacer, leads a revolt of unpaid barbarian troops in Italy. He marches on Ravenna, deposes Romulus Augustulus, and sends the imperial crown and purple robes to the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople. His message is clear. The West no longer requires its own emperor. Odoacer declares himself king of Italy, nominally ruling in the Eastern Emperor's name, though in practice he is independent. Romulus is spared, given a pension, and sent to a villa in Campania, where he vanishes from history. There is no climactic final battle, only the quiet extinguishing of an institution that had endured for centuries. Traditionally, 476 CE marks the end of the Western Roman Empire and the close of classical antiquity, though its decline had been long and gradual. Yet the Eastern Empire endures. In Constantinople, emperors continue to rule as Romans, commanding armies, collecting taxes, enforcing Roman law. This Eastern Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, will survive until 1453 CE, nearly 1,000 years after the West collapses. But the Western world where Rome was born, where legions once marched and Latin shaped the Romance languages, enters a new era. Some call it the Dark Ages, though historians today prefer late antiquity or the early medieval period. The unified Mediterranean world under Roman rule has ended, replaced by emerging Germanic kingdoms, the roots of feudalism, and eventually the medieval Christian world. Let this twilight settle over you like a gentle tide. The empire's fall is not sudden or violent, but gradual and natural, like drifting into sleep. The Western Empire has ended, yet its legacy, its languages, laws, architecture, and ideas will shape history for 15 centuries to come. Rest now, deeply, as the ancient world rests, its long day completed, its night softly descending.